Look at this shape. A small rectangular bag, a curved handle, held down at the side by a towering, winged figure carved into stone almost 3,000 years ago. Now look at this one, carved a continent away, by people who never crossed an ocean, never traded a single bead with Mesopotamia, never even knew the other civilization existed. Same handle. Same proportions. Same way of holding it. For 100 years, archaeologists walked past this object in museum after museum and wrote one word in their notebooks: decorative. Nobody asked what it was. Nobody asked why it never changed. This is the story of what happens when someone finally does. Before we go anywhere near the strange part, we have to be honest about where this object actually comes from, because the internet has buried it under so much noise that most people have never heard the real version. The bag shows up most famously on the walls of the northwest palace of Ashurnasirpal II, an Assyrian king who ruled starting around 883 BCE. If you have ever seen a photograph of a winged, muscular being standing beside a stylized tree, one hand raised toward the branches holding a small cone, the other hand down, at its side gripping a compact rectangular object with a curved handle, that is the image everyone is talking about. Assyriologists have a name for the object in the raised hand, a mulalu, generally understood as a ceremonial purifier, something like a stylized spikelet, or brush used in ritual gestures toward the sacred tree. The object in the lowered hand is usually called a bandudu, a bucket. Not a metaphor, not a mystery box. A bucket, of the kind used to carry water or ritual substances in temple ceremonies. That is the mainstream reading, and it comes from decades of careful philological and iconographic work, cross-checked against cuneiform texts that actually describe temple rituals involving buckets and purifying implements. The winged beings carrying them are called apkallu, a Sumerian and later Akkadian word usually translated as sages. In the texts, they are not treated as cartoon monsters. They appear in king lists and ritual texts as figures associated with the transmission of knowledge before and after a great flood, tied to named cities, and, in some traditions, to specific human rulers they supposedly advised. The most famous of them, Adapa, is described as emerging from the sea to instruct early humanity. That much genuinely is in the ancient texts. Sumer genuinely did invent the first confirmed writing system on Earth, some of the first law codes, some of the earliest systematic astronomy, a base 60 number system we still use every time we read a clock. None of that requires exaggeration. It was already the most consequential few centuries in the story of human civilization, sitting right there in the mainstream textbooks, no embellishment needed. Here is where the story most people know online starts to drift away from the evidence. Over the last 15 or 20 years, a genre of internet content built around ancient astronaut theories took this single Assyrian bucket and cone motif, and started hunting for lookalikes everywhere else in the ancient world. A figure on a Maya stela holding a small rectangular object. A relief at Göbekli Tepe with a curved shape near a pillar. The central figure on the gateway of the sun at Tiwanaku in Bolivia, holding staffs and ornaments that, from a distance and with a squint, sort of resemble a bag. Videos started stacking these images side by side with dramatic music, calling it the handbag of the gods, and presenting it as if a rigorous scientific team had measured all of them with calipers and found the same object, proving contact between civilizations separated by oceans and millennia, or even the presence of the same non-human beings on every continent. That version of the story is compelling television. It is not supported by any published archaeological measurement study. No peer-reviewed paper exists showing a matching height-to-width ratio across Assyrian, Olmec, Maya, and Andean carvings. That claim, wherever you encounter it, is a piece of internet folklore dressed up in the language of laboratory precision, and it is worth saying that plainly, because pretending otherwise would be doing exactly what this video is here to push back against. So why does the comparison feel so convincing when you actually look at the images side by side? This is where real cognitive science, not archaeology, gives us an answer, and it is honestly more interesting than the alternative. Human beings are pattern-matching machines. We are extraordinarily good at spotting similarity, and extraordinarily bad at accounting for how many opportunities there were for a coincidence to occur. Rectangular objects with a curved top, held in one hand, are about as basic a shape as human art produces. Baskets, pouches, bags, ceremonial vessels, offering boxes, bundles of ritual implements. Independent cultures across the ancient world produced small portable rectangular containers because that is simply an efficient, ergonomic shape for something a human hand needs to carry. When you comb through tens of thousands of carvings across 5,000 years of art from every inhabited continent, and you are actively looking for anything that resembles a bag, you are guaranteed to find dozens of near matches purely by chance. This is a well-documented bias called apophenia, the tendency to perceive meaningful connections between unrelated things, and it is the same mechanism behind seeing a face in a cloud or a word in static noise. Archaeologists are not immune to it either, which is exactly why the field insists on rigorous typology, controlled comparison, and dated stratigraphy before declaring two objects from different continents related, rather than simply lining up photographs that look similar in a video. There is also a much simpler, much less mysterious reason the Assyrian bucket keeps reappearing in art from Mesopotamia specifically, without needing any contact with the Americas at all. It is because the ritual it depicts was real, local, and repeated for centuries. Purification with water, and the touching of sacred trees or plants with ritual implements, shows up again and again in cuneiform temple texts recovered from Mesopotamian archives. The scene was not a mysterious symbol whose meaning had been lost. It was closer to a religious illustration, repeated because the ritual itself was repeated, generation after generation, workshop after workshop, palace after palace, by artisans trained in a shared visual tradition with shared tools and shared conventions. That is also the real answer to the claim that the object never changes across 1,000 years. Within a single, continuous artistic tradition, with scribes and sculptors trained by direct apprenticeship inside temple and palace workshops, remarkable stability in a specific ritual image is not shocking at all. It is exactly what you would expect from an unbroken institutional tradition, the same way a specific religious icon, or a national emblem, can stay visually consistent for centuries, when it is deliberately preserved by trained specialists, rather than passed along casually. None of this means the real object is boring, and it does not mean the people who study it have nothing left to argue about. Scholars still debate the precise contents and function of the bucket, whether it always held water, whether in some scenes it may represent something closer to a ritual kit, and how the imagery relates to the broader Mesopotamian idea of the me, the abstract divine attributes of civilization, things like kingship, wisdom, and craftsmanship, which Sumerian mythology describes almost as objects that could be held, transferred, and even stolen from one city to another in one of the oldest myths. We have the story of Inanna and Enki. That idea, of knowledge and civilization itself imagined as something concrete enough to carry in a container, is genuinely one of the most striking concepts in the whole of ancient Near Eastern thought, and it needs no invented cross-continental study to be worth exploring on its own terms. It is also worth pausing on why fringe theories latch onto real archaeology in the first place, because that pattern deserves scrutiny too. Sumer is a genuinely dramatic origin point, the place where writing, law, and organized astronomy first appear in the archaeological record in forms we can still read today. When something is that impressive, it becomes an attractive canvas for bigger, stranger claims, because a small kernel of undisputed fact makes the exaggerated version feel more credible by association. That does not mean everyone who finds the Apkallu images fascinating is being reckless. Curiosity about these figures is completely reasonable. The winged sages, the sacred tree scenes, the mysterious bucket and cone, all of it is legitimately strange and worth understanding on its own merits, without needing to import an unsupported claim about ancient astronauts or secret global civilization to make it interesting. If you want to actually go looking at this material yourself, here is where the trail leads. The Ashurnasirpal II reliefs are held in major museum collections, including the British Museum, where you can see the winged Apkallu figures with the bucket and cone up close, alongside the cuneiform inscriptions that once ran across the same slabs. The broader Apkallu tradition is documented in Assyriological studies of Mesopotamian religion, and the Adapa myth survives in fragments recovered from sites including Amarna in Egypt and the library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh. None of that requires you to accept a single unproven claim about hidden contact between continents. The real story stands on its own, resting on excavated tablets and dated reliefs rather than a stack of side-by-side screenshots. So where does that leave the wider claim, the one that treats this as proof of ancient astronauts walking among early civilizations, teaching separate peoples the same rituals with the same tools on opposite sides of the planet? The honest answer is that it remains an unproven, unpublished internet theory, interesting as a piece of modern folklore about the ancient world, but not something the archaeological record currently supports. That is not the same as saying nothing here is worth wondering about. Mesopotamia's achievements were real and staggering on their own terms. The Apkallu were treated by the people who invented writing as central enough to their own origin story that they wrote them into royal genealogies and temple rituals. Whatever that bucket in the relief actually meant to the priests and sculptors who carved it 3,000 years ago, it was clearly important enough to repeat, palace after palace, for centuries. That is a genuinely rich mystery, and it does not need a single fabricated data point to stay that way. What do you think is really going on with images like this? A real ritual object faithfully repeated by a long unbroken tradition, or something people are seeing because they are looking for it? Tell me which explanation actually holds up once you take away the dramatic music and look at the sources directly. And if you want more videos that separate what the ancient record actually says from what the internet has added on top of it, stick around, because that is exactly the kind of digging this channel keeps doing.